The child's skin was burning. Not warm, not feverish. Burning, like something inside her small body had caught fire and refused to go out. Rowan Hale pressed his palm against his daughter's forehead and jerked it back. 3 days. 3 endless, sleepless days of watching Eleanor fight something neither he nor Mira could see, couldn't name, couldn't stop. And now, in the exhausted silence of the 4th dawn, with his wife standing across the bed looking more like a stranger than the woman he'd married, Rowan realized the fever wasn't the only thing breaking. He was about to say something that would destroy everything. If you want to see how far a marriage can fall, and whether it can ever climb back, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The house smelled like fear. Not the sharp, obvious kind, the kind that makes you run or scream. This was the slow, creeping type that settles into wood and fabric, that makes every shadow feel heavier, every creak in the floorboards sound like a warning. It had been there for 3 days now, thick as smoke, and Mira Hale had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. Until it changes. She stood at the edge of Eleanor's bed, her hands gripping the wooden footboard so hard her knuckles had gone white an hour ago. Across from her, Rowan sat slumped in a chair he'd dragged in from the kitchen on the first night, when they'd still thought this would pass quickly. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, face shadowed with stubble that made him look older than 32. He looked like a man who'd forgotten how to sleep. Mira knew she looked worse. Her breathing's better, Rowan said quietly. His voice was rough, scraped raw from disuse and worry. Isn't it? Mira didn't answer right away. She watched the rise and fall of Eleanor's chest beneath the quilts, one her mother had made, one Rowan's mother had sent after the wedding, one Mira herself had stitched during her first winter here. Layers. Always layers in this house. Maybe, she said finally. It is. Rowan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at their daughter like he could will her well through sheer focus. It's steadier. You can hear it. Mira could hear it. She'd been listening to nothing else for 72 hours. Every rattling inhale, every shuddering exhale, every pause that lasted too long and made her heart stop until the next breath came. She'd memorized the rhythm the way other women memorized recipes or prayers. But she didn't say that. She just nodded. Eleanor stirred slightly, her small hand twitching against the pillow. 4 years old, bright-eyed and stubborn, and so full of questions that some days Mira wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Now she lay silent, her dark hair damp against her temples, her cheeks flushed with a fever that had spiked and fallen and spiked again like a tide neither of them understood. The doctor had come twice, an old man with kind eyes and useless hands who'd prescribed cool cloths and willow bark tea and thyme. Children are resilient, he'd said, as if that was supposed to be comforting, as if resilience was something you could count on instead of just hope for. Mira had smiled and thanked him and shut the door behind him, then stood in the hallway for 5 full minutes, trying to remember how to breathe. Rowan had found her there, hadn't said anything, just put his hand on her shoulder, briefly, carefully, like he wasn't sure he was allowed, and then went back to Eleanor's room. That had been yesterday, or maybe the day before. Time had stopped meaning much. You should rest, Rowan said now, still not looking at her. I'll stay with her. I'm fine. Mira, I said, I'm fine. The sharpness in her voice surprised them both. Rowan's head came up, and for the first time in hours their eyes met across the bed. His were bloodshot, rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that made people say things they didn't mean, or things they'd been meaning to say all along. Mira looked away first. I'll make tea, she said, and left before he could argue. The kitchen was cold. The fire had burned down to embers sometime in the night, and neither of them had bothered to build it back up. Mira moved through the familiar space like a ghost, filling the kettle, setting it on the stove, reaching for the tin of herbs on the shelf. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind didn't. She'd been doing that a lot lately, moving without thinking, cooking, cleaning, mending, all the small tasks that kept a household running even when the people inside it were falling apart. It was easier that way. Easier than stopping. Easier than asking questions she didn't want answered. The kettle began to hiss. Mira stared at it, watching steam curl into the dim pre-dawn light filtering through the window. Outside, the world was starting to wake up. Birds, wind in the trees, ordinary sounds, life going on like nothing was wrong. She hated it. Mira. Rowan's voice from the doorway made her flinch. She turned, already bracing for bad news. Fever spiked again, breathing worse. Something. But he just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "What?" she said. "She's asking for you." Relief hit so hard it almost knocked her sideways. Mira set down the cup she'd been holding. When had she picked it up? And pushed past Rowan without waiting for him to move. Her footsteps were too loud on the wooden floor as she hurried down the hallway, past the parlor they never used, past the door to the room she and Rowan shared, to the small bedroom at the end where yellow lamplight still glowed. Eleanor's eyes were open, not wide, not bright, but open, focused, looking around with something like recognition instead of the glassy confusion that had terrified Mira for 3 straight days. "Mama?" The word was hoarse, barely a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound Mira had ever heard. She was at the bedside in 2 strides, kneeling, taking Eleanor's small hand in both of hers. "I'm here, sweetheart." "I'm right here." "Thirsty." "Oh." "Of course you are. Of course." Mira reached for the cup of water she'd kept on the nightstand, hands shaking so badly she almost spilled it. She held it to Eleanor's lips, supporting her head, heart pounding as her daughter took one sip, then another. Behind her, Rowan appeared in the doorway. She could feel him there even without turning around, his presence like a weight, familiar and foreign at the same time. "The fever broke," he said quietly. Mira nodded. She could feel it under her palm, Eleanor's forehead still warm, but not burning. Not that terrible, unnatural heat that had made her think of fire and fear and all the ways a body could fail. "You're going to be fine," Mira whispered, brushing damp hair back from Eleanor's face. "You're going to be just fine." Eleanor's eyes were already drifting shut again, but this time it looked like sleep. Real sleep. The kind that healed instead of worried. Mira stayed kneeling beside the bed long after her daughter's breathing evened out, long after her legs started to ache, long after Rowan finally moved from the doorway and sat back down in his chair on the other side. The silence between them was different now, not the tense, desperate quiet of the past 3 days, but something else, something heavier. "We should sleep," Rowan said eventually. "Both of us. She'll be all right for a few hours." "You go," Mira said. "I'll stay." "Mira, go." She heard him stand, heard him hesitate, heard him walk to the door and stop there, one hand on the frame again like he was holding himself upright. "I'm sorry," he said. Mira's hand stilled in Eleanor's hair. "For what?" The pause lasted too long. When Rowan spoke again, his voice was so quiet she almost didn't hear it. "For not being enough." She turned then, sharply, ready to argue, but he was already gone. By the time the sun came up properly, Eleanor was sleeping peacefully, and Mira had run out of small tasks to keep her hands busy. She'd straightened the quilts, refilled the water cup, checked Eleanor's temperature so many times she'd memorized the exact feel of her daughter's skin under her palm. She'd done everything except think about what Rowan had said. For not being enough. What did that even mean? Not enough for what? For Eleanor? That was absurd. He'd barely left their daughter's side for 3 days. Not enough for the farm? He worked himself half to death every season. Not enough for... Mira stopped that thought before it could finish. She stood up carefully, bones protesting after hours of kneeling, and walked to the window. Outside, the world looked aggressively normal. Trees, fields, the barn where Rowan kept the horses and the handful of cattle that kept them fed. The fence line that needed mending, the garden that needed weeding, everything that needed something. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. When she'd married Rowan Hale 2 years ago, she'd known what she was getting into, or thought she had. A widower with a young daughter, a farm that needed a woman's hand, a man who was kind enough and decent enough and broken enough that she'd convinced herself she could help. She'd been so sure of herself then, so certain that being useful was the same thing as being loved. Now she wasn't sure of anything. "Mira? Dear." She opened her eyes. Rowan stood in the doorway. Again, always in doorways, never quite entering, never quite leaving, dressed in clean clothes, face washed, hair still damp. He looked more like himself, less like a ghost. "You changed," she said, because it was easier than saying anything else. "Thought I should." He glanced at Eleanor, still sleeping. "How is she?" "Good. Better. The same. You should rest." "I will." Neither of them moved. The silence stretched out like a rope pulled too tight. Mira waited for it to snap, for one of them to say something real, something that mattered. "I meant what I said," Rowan said quietly. "Which part?" "The sorry part." Mira turned to face him fully, arms crossed over her chest. Not defensive, just holding herself together. "You don't have anything to be sorry for." "Don't I?" "Rowan, I need to tell you something." His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. They hung at his sides, fingers curling and uncurling like he was trying to hold on to something that kept slipping away. "I've needed to tell you for a long time." Mira's stomach dropped. "What?" He looked at her then, really looked, the way he used to when they were courting, when she'd thought those steady gray eyes saw something in her worth keeping. "When I'm with you," he said slowly, carefully, like each word cost him something. "When we're together, I don't see you." The world tilted. "What?" "I see her." His voice cracked. "I see Celia. Every time. I don't know how to stop it. I've tried. I swear I've tried, but stop." Mira held up one hand, palm out, like she could physically block the words from reaching her. "Just stop. Mira, don't." Her voice came out strangled, broken. "Don't say anything else." But he kept talking because of course he did. Because now that he'd started, he couldn't stop. Words pouring out like blood from a wound that had finally been opened. "I thought it would get better. I thought if I just gave it time, if I just tried harder. But it hasn't. And you deserve to know. You deserve better than this. Better than me pretending." "Pretending?" The word came out sharp enough to cut. Mira stepped forward, then stopped, unsure whether she wanted to move closer or run. "You've been pretending for 2 years." "No, not pretending to care. I do care. You see your dead wife when you touch me." Said out loud, it sounded even worse. It sounded impossible. It sounded like the kind of thing that should have been a deal breaker from the start. The kind of thing you don't come back from. Rowan's face crumpled. "I'm sorry." "You said that already." "I don't know what else to say." "Then don't say anything." Mira's voice was cold now, controlled, the way it got when she was trying very hard not to scream. "Don't say a single other word." She walked past him, shoulder brushing his, and kept walking, down the hallway, past the parlor, into the room they shared, the room where she'd tried so hard to be enough, to fill a space that had never been meant for her, the room where, apparently, she'd never been seen at all. She closed the door quietly, locked it, and then, very carefully, very precisely, she sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to remember how to breathe. 3 hours later, Mira emerged. She'd washed her face, changed her dress, pinned her hair up with the same careful precision she applied to everything else. She looked composed, capable. Like a woman who had her life in order, she looked like a liar. Rowan was in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee he hadn't drunk. He looked up when she entered, face hopeful and wary and guilty all at once. "Mira, I'm moving into the spare room," she said calmly. "Eleanor needs me close while she recovers, and you need your rest. It makes sense." It makes sense," she repeated, harder this time. Rowan stood up. "Please, let me explain." "You explained." Mira moved past him to the stove, checking the pot of broth she'd left simmering earlier. Still good. Everything still in its place. "You were very clear. I didn't mean to hurt you." She laughed, a short, bitter sound that didn't reach her eyes. "What did you think would happen, Rowan? You tell your wife that you've been imagining someone else every time you touch her, and she'd just, what, smile and say it's fine? I thought you deserved the truth. The truth." Mira turned to face him, wooden spoon still in her hand like a weapon. "You want to know the truth? I've spent 2 years trying to be perfect for you. Perfect wife, perfect mother to your daughter. Perfect housekeeper and cook and companion. I ironed your shirts and mended your socks and smiled when you came home and never, never asked for more than you were willing to give. And it still wasn't enough. Because I'm not her, I'm not Celia, and I never will be. I don't want you to be. Yes, you do. Her voice broke on the last word, and she hated herself for it. Hated the tears that were threatening, hated the way her hands were shaking, hated that even now, even after everything, part of her still wanted him to say it wasn't true. You want her back, and you settled for me instead. That's not fair. None of this is fair! The spoon hit the counter with a crack that made them both flinch. You don't get to drop this on me after 3 days of hell and then ask me to be fair. You don't get to confess your way to absolution while I'm still trying to process the fact that my daughter almost died and my husband doesn't actually see me when he looks at me. Silence crashed down like a wave. Rowan's face had gone pale. I see you. No. Mira's voice was quiet now, drained of everything except exhaustion. You don't. You see what you need me to be. You see the empty space she left behind, but you don't see me. She picked up the spoon again, turned back to the stove, and stirred the broth with hands that had finally stopped shaking. I'm moving into the spare room tonight, she said again. I'll still run the house. I'll still care for Eleanor. Nothing will change on the outside. But inside, she glanced over her shoulder at him, and for the first time in 2 years, Rowan saw something in her eyes he didn't recognize, something cold and distant and unreachable. Inside, everything already has. She turned back to the stove. Rowan stood there for another minute, maybe 2, waiting for something, an opening, a softening, a sign that this wasn't as final as it felt. But Mira kept stirring the broth, steady and mechanical, like he wasn't even there. Eventually, he left. The next week passed in a kind of surreal normalcy. Eleanor recovered quickly, the way children do, bouncing back with an energy that seemed impossible given how close she'd come to, well, neither Rowan nor Mira talked about how close. They just watched her play and eat and laugh and tried not to think about the alternative. The house ran like clockwork. Mira cooked, cleaned, tended the garden, helped Eleanor with her letters, smiled when neighbors stopped by to check on them. She was perfect. And Rowan was going quietly insane. She'd meant what she said about the spare room. Moved her things in the same night. Clothes, books, the small cedar box where she kept her mother's jewelry. She'd done it while he was out checking on the cattle, so he wouldn't see, wouldn't try to stop her. When he'd come back inside, the door to his bedroom was open, and half the closet was empty. He'd stood there staring at the empty space for 15 minutes before he had the guts to knock on the spare room door. Mira? What? Not a question, a wall. Can we talk? We are talking. Can I come in? Pause. Then, no. He'd pressed his forehead against the door, hands flat against the wood like he could reach through it. Please, go to bed, Rowan. He had, eventually. Lay there in the too big bed staring at the ceiling until dawn, then got up and did his chores and pretended everything was fine. They were both very good at pretending, but Eleanor wasn't. Why doesn't Mama sleep with you anymore? She asked one morning at breakfast, direct as a knife to the chest. Rowan nearly choked on his coffee. Across the table, Mira calmly buttered toast like the question hadn't landed like a bomb. Mama's sleeping closer to your room, Rowan managed, in case you need her in the night. Eleanor frowned. But I'm better now. I know, sweetheart. Mira set the toast on Eleanor's plate, touched her hair gently. But it makes me feel better to be close. Is that all right? I guess. Eleanor picked up the toast, studied it seriously. Mama? Yes? Are you sad? Mira's hand stilled. Why would you think that? You don't smile the same. Out of the mouths of children. Rowan watched Mira's face carefully, saw the micro-expressions flash across it too fast to name. Pain, anger, resignation, before she smoothed them all away and smiled at their daughter. I'm just tired, love. That's all. Eleanor didn't look convinced, but she was 4, and toast was more interesting than adult problems. She took a bite and started chattering about the birds she'd seen that morning, and the moment passed, but Rowan couldn't stop thinking about it. You don't smile the same." She didn't. He'd noticed it too, but hearing Eleanor say it out loud made it real in a way he couldn't ignore. Mira still smiled. At Eleanor, at neighbors, at the chickens when they did something amusing, but it wasn't the same. The warmth had gone out of it, like someone had turned down a lamp. He'd done that. Him. His confession, his truth, his inability to just keep his mouth shut and let her live in ignorant peace. But what was the alternative? Keep lying? Keep pretending he didn't see Celia's face every time he closed his eyes, didn't hear her laugh and Eleanor's giggle, didn't feel her absence like a wound that wouldn't heal? He'd thought telling the truth would help, would lance the infection and let them both breathe. Instead, it had just spread the poison. 2 weeks after Eleanor's fever broke, Mira's sister came to visit. Clara was everything Mira wasn't: loud, laughing, unfiltered, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately made it brighter. She swept in with a basket of preserves and a long hug for Mira and a delighted squeal when she saw Eleanor. "Look at you, up and running around like nothing happened. Your mama said you were at death's door." "I had a fever," Eleanor said seriously. "It was very high, and I'll bet it was." Clara ruffled her hair, then straightened and looked at Rowan. "And you look terrible." "Thanks, Clara. I mean it. You look like you haven't slept in a month." She glanced at Mira, who was unpacking the preserves with careful precision. "Both of you do. What's going on?" "Nothing," Mira said smoothly. "We're just still recovering. It was a difficult time." Clara's eyes narrowed. She wasn't fooled, but she was also smart enough not to push in front of Eleanor. "Well," she said brightly, "I'm here to help. Mira, you're going to sit down and let me cook dinner. Rowan, you're going to take a walk or a nap or something before you fall over. And Miss Eleanor," she scooped the little girl up, making her shriek with laughter, "you and I are going to make cookies. Can we make the ones with jam?" "We can make whatever kind you want, sweetheart." Rowan caught Mira's eye across the kitchen. For just a second, something passed between them. Gratitude, maybe? Or just relief at having another person in the house. Another voice to fill the silence. Then Mira looked away, and the moment was gone. That night, after Eleanor was asleep and Clara had taken over the spare room, forcing Mira back into the main bedroom with Rowan, Mira stood at the window of their room and stared out at nothing. Behind her, Rowan sat on the edge of the bed, trying to find words. "Your sister's worried," he said finally. "I know. She asked me if everything was all right." "What did you tell her?" "That we were fine." Mira's laugh was soft and humorless. Liar. What was I supposed to say? She turned then, leaning back against the window frame. The moonlight caught her face, highlighting angles he'd memorized in the early days of their marriage. The slope of her nose, the curve of her jaw, the way her eyes went dark when she was thinking too hard. "You could have told her the truth," Mira said. "You seem to like that lately." "Mira, oh, do you know what the worst part is?" She cut him off, voice steady but sharp. "It's not that you don't love me. I think I knew that from the beginning. It's that you tried. You tried so hard to make yourself love me, to force yourself to see me instead of her, and you couldn't. And now we're both paying for it. I do care about you." Caring isn't loving, Rowan. Caring is what you do for a neighbor or a friend. Caring is polite. It's safe. She pushed off the window frame, crossed her arms. "I don't want to be cared about, like I'm some kind of obligation." "You're not. Then what am I?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "What am I to you, really?" "Besides the woman who keeps your house and raises your daughter and warms your bed when you need her to?" "That's not fair. I'm done being fair." Mira's voice didn't rise, but something in it made Rowan stand up. "I'm done being understanding and patient and perfect. I'm done trying to compete with a memory. I never asked you to compete. You didn't have to ask. It was always there, hanging over everything we did, her clothes in the closet until I finally packed them away, her recipes in the kitchen, her daughter calling me mama, but looking at me like she was trying to decide if I was good enough to replace what she lost." Mira's hands clenched into fists. "And you," Mira's hands, looking at me with those sad eyes like I was supposed to fix you, like I could somehow fill the hole she left behind. I thought, Rowan's voice broke. I thought I could move on. I thought if I just tried hard enough, well, you can't. The words were brutal in their simplicity. You can't move on because you won't let yourself. You're so busy holding on to guilt and grief that there's no room for anything else, including me. She walked to the door, hand on the knob. Where are you going? Downstairs. I'll sleep on the sofa. Clara can have the spare room. Mira, please. She paused, hand still on the door, but didn't turn around. Please what, Rowan? Please forgive you? Please pretend this doesn't hurt? Please keep being the perfect wife while you work through your feelings for a woman who's been dead for 3 years? Her voice cracked. I can't do this anymore. Then what do you want me to do? Finally, she looked back at him. Her eyes were dry, but there was something in them that was worse than tears. Something final. I want you to figure out what you're really mourning, she said quietly. Because I don't think it's her. I think it's the version of yourself that died with her. The man who didn't carry guilt like a stone in his chest. The man who could be happy without feeling like he was betraying someone. She paused. And until you figure that out, I can't help you. I won't. She left. Rowan stood alone in the bedroom. Their bedroom, his bedroom. He didn't even know anymore, and listened to her footsteps fade down the stairs. Then, very slowly, he sat back down on the bed and put his head in his hands. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The house creaked and settled like it was trying to get comfortable for a long, cold night. And somewhere in the darkness, Rowan Hale finally admitted the truth he'd been running from for 3 years. Mira was right. Clara left after 4 days, hugging Mira too long and whispering something in her ear that made Mira's jaw tighten. Rowan watched from the porch as the wagon pulled away, his sister-in-law's eyes on him the whole time, not hostile exactly, but measuring, like she was trying to decide if he was worth saving. He wasn't sure of the answer himself. The house felt emptier after Clara left, which shouldn't have been possible. It had felt empty for weeks now, a kind of emptiness that had nothing to do with how many people were inside. But her departure made it worse, like she'd taken all the breathable air with her. Mira went back to the spare room that same night. Rowan didn't argue. What was the point? The next morning, he woke to find Eleanor sitting on his bed, staring at him with those dark, serious eyes that sometimes made him forget she was only 4. Did you and Mama have a fight? Rowan pushed himself up on one elbow, trying to shake off the fog of another sleepless night. What makes you think that? She doesn't talk to you anymore, not really. Eleanor tilted her head, considering. Aunt Clara said grown-ups are stupid sometimes. Despite everything, Rowan almost smiled. Did she now? She said people who love each other are supposed to talk, not just be quiet and sad all the time. The almost smile died. Rowan reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Eleanor's ear, the same way Celia used to. No, the same way he used to. This was his gesture, his daughter, his responsibility to not mess up more than he already had. Your Aunt Clara is very wise, he said carefully. So are you going to talk to Mama? I'm trying, sweetheart. Try harder. Eleanor said it matter-of-factly, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Then she scrambled off the bed and ran out, leaving Rowan alone with advice from a 4-year-old that cut deeper than any of Mira's silences. Try harder. Like he hadn't been trying. Like he hadn't spent 3 years trying to be the man he was supposed to be. Good husband, good father, good neighbor. Like he hadn't tried so hard to move forward that he'd forgotten how to be honest about what was actually holding him back. He got up and dressed and went outside to feed the horses, because that at least was straightforward. Horses didn't care if you were broken inside. They just wanted hay and water and a clean stall. The barn was quiet, except for the soft sounds of the animals moving in their stalls. Rowan worked methodically, mucking out, refilling water troughs, checking hooves. Physical labor that let his mind go blank for a while, until he got to Celia's horse. Except it wasn't Celia's horse anymore. Hadn't been for 3 years. It was just a horse, a gray mare named Tempest, who was getting old and lazy and spent most of her time in the pasture doing nothing. But she'd been Celia's favorite. Celia had ridden her almost every day, tearing across the fields with her hair flying behind her, laughing like the wind itself couldn't catch her, until the day the saddle strap broke. Rowan stood outside Tempest's stall, hand on the rough wood, and made himself remember it. made himself see it clearly for the first time in 3 years. The strap had been worn. He'd noticed it weeks before, meant to replace it, kept putting it off because there was always something else that needed doing first. The fence, the roof, the 100 small things that kept a farm running. And then Celia had gone out riding, and the strap had snapped, and she'd fallen wrong. Just fallen. People fell off horses all the time, but she'd hit her head on a rock, and by the time Rowan had found her, by the time he'd carried her back to the house and sent for the doctor, it was already too late. She'd died in their bed while he held her hand and begged her to stay, and he'd never replaced that strap. That was the truth he'd been carrying. Not that he'd killed her, though some days it felt like that, but that he'd been careless, negligent, so focused on everything else that he'd let the one thing that mattered slip through his fingers. The guilt had been easier to carry than that truth. Guilt was heavy but simple. You felt it. You bore it. You let it shape you into someone who would never make that mistake again. But negligence? Negligence meant he'd failed. Meant he'd had a choice and made the wrong one. Meant that if he'd just paid attention, just done the thing he'd known needed doing, Celia would still be alive. And maybe, he'd spent 3 years punishing himself for that instead of facing it. Rowan leaned his forehead against the stall door and breathed. "You look like hell." He jerked upright. Thomas Renfrew stood in the barn doorway, arms crossed, expression somewhere between concerned and annoyed. Thomas owned the neighboring farm and had been friends with Rowan since they were boys. He was also one of the few people who could get away with brutal honesty. "Thanks," Rowan said roughly. "I mean it. You've looked bad before, but this is something else." Thomas walked closer, studying him. "What's going on?" "Nothing. That's a lie, and we both know it." Thomas leaned against the stall beside him. "Mira came by yesterday, asked to borrow some books." Rowan's head came up. "She did?" "Yeah, said she needed something to occupy her mind." Thomas paused. "She looked about as bad as you do, by the way. You two having trouble?" "That's not your business." "Maybe not. But I've known you long enough to know when you're spiraling." Thomas's voice softened slightly. "This about Celia?" Everything was about Celia. That was the problem. "I told Mira something I shouldn't have," Rowan said finally. "What?" "The truth." Thomas waited. When Rowan didn't elaborate, he sighed. "You're going to have to give me more than that." So Rowan did. Not everything. Some things were too private even for old friends. But enough. The confession during Eleanor's illness. Mira's withdrawal. The way the house had gone cold despite the fires burning in every room. Thomas listened without interrupting, which was one of his better qualities. When Rowan finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're an idiot," he said finally. "I know." "No, I mean a real, genuine, spectacular idiot." Thomas shook his head. "You told your wife you see your dead wife when you're intimate with her?" "I told you, I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you took a perfectly good marriage and set it on fire because you felt guilty." "It wasn't a perfectly good marriage," Rowan shot back. "It was a lie." "Was it? Or were you just too busy mourning to notice what you actually had?" Thomas straightened up. "Look, I loved Celia. We all did. She was bright and wild and made everything more interesting. But she's gone, Rowan. She's been gone for 3 years. And Mira's been here, holding everything together, loving your daughter, trying to love you, and you've been... What? Wishing she was someone else?" He just said, "It's not that simple, isn't it?" Thomas's voice was hard now. "You married Mira, not Celia's ghost, not some stand-in to make yourself feel less lonely. You married a real woman who deserves better than being compared to a memory for the rest of her life." Rowan's hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me. Make me understand why you think it's better to destroy what you have instead of fighting for it." "Because I can't fight for something I don't deserve." The words came out louder than Rowan intended, echoing in the barn. "I killed her, Thomas. I knew that strap was worn, and I didn't fix it, and she died because of it. And every time I look at Mira, every time I let myself be happy, it feels like I'm betraying Celia all over again." Silence fell like a hammer. Thomas stared at him for a long moment, then very deliberately said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." "Thomas?" "No, listen to me." Thomas grabbed his shoulder, hard enough to make Rowan meet his eyes. An accident happened. A terrible, awful accident that nobody could have predicted. Yes, the strap was worn. Yes, you should have fixed it. But Celia knew it was worn too, and she went riding anyway because that's who she was. Reckless and brave and so sure nothing bad would ever happen to her. You didn't kill her. Life killed her. Random, meaningless chance. I should have... What? Controlled everything? Made sure nothing bad ever happened? That's not how the world works, and you know it. Thomas's grip tightened. And using your guilt as an excuse to punish yourself, and Mira, isn't honoring Celia's memory. It's wasting the life you still have. Rowan wanted to argue. Wanted to explain that Thomas didn't understand, couldn't understand what it was like to carry this weight. But the words wouldn't come, because somewhere deep down, in a place he'd been avoiding for 3 years, he knew Thomas was right. "I don't know how to fix this," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Start by figuring out what you actually want. Not what you think you should want. Not what would make you feel less guilty. What do you actually want, Rowan?" That was the question, wasn't it? Rowan looked at Tempest, still standing placidly in her stall, old and content and oblivious to the weight of the past she represented. "I want to stop seeing her everywhere," he said slowly. "I want to look at my life without feeling like I'm stealing it from someone else. I want..." He paused, the next words harder than he expected. "I want to actually see Mira, not as a replacement, not as the woman who isn't Celia. Just Mira." "Then do that." "It's not that simple." "It is, actually. It's just not easy." Thomas stepped back, releasing his shoulder. "But you're going to have to try, because from what I saw yesterday, Mira's about done waiting for you to figure your life out." He was right about that, too. Thomas left shortly after, with a promise to come by later in the week and check on him. Rowan finished with the horses, then stood in the barn for a long time, trying to work up the courage to go back inside. When he finally did, he found Mira in the kitchen, kneading bread with mechanical precision. She didn't look up when he entered. "Mira, what?" Still not a question. Still a wall. "I need to tell you something." "You've told me enough." Her hands moved steadily through the dough, pushing and folding, pushing and folding. "Unless you're planning to confess something else, I'd rather not hear it." "It's not a confession, it's..." Rowan struggled for the right word. "An explanation. Maybe. Or an apology that actually means something." "Your apologies don't mean anything, Rowan. Apologies are words. I need action." "Then what action do you want?" Finally, she stopped kneading and looked at him. Her face was dusted with flour, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her expression completely neutral. "I want you to leave," she said calmly. The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" "Not forever. Not even for very long. But I need you to go somewhere, anywhere, and figure yourself out. Because I can't do it for you, and I'm tired of trying." She turned back to the dough. "It'll take a few days. A week. However long it takes. But don't come back until you know what you actually want from this marriage." "Mira, swoye." "I mean it." Her voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I've spent 2 years being patient and understanding and accommodating, and where has it gotten me? You don't see me. You don't want me. You want absolution, or maybe just someone to share the burden of your guilt. But I'm not a priest, Rowan, and I'm not your medicine. I'm a person, and I deserve to be treated like one." She was right. Again. Everything she said was right, and it made him feel like the worst kind of fool. "Where would I go?" "I don't care. Thomas's place. An inn in town. The barn." She shaped the dough into a ball and placed it in a bowl to rise. "Just not here. Not right now." Rowan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. What was there to say? She was right. She deserved space. She deserved a husband who could look at her without ghosts in the way. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll go." Mira's hands stilled for just a moment, like she'd expected him to fight, and his agreement caught her off guard. But she didn't say anything, just covered the bowl with a cloth and carried it to the windowsill where the sun would help it rise. Rowan packed a bag, clothes, a blanket, some food Mira silently prepared and left on the table. Eleanor watched from the doorway of the parlor, eyes wide and worried. "Where are you going, Papa?" Rowan knelt down in front of her, trying to find words that wouldn't scare her. "I need to go away for a little while, just a few days." "Why?" "Because," how did you explain adult failures to a 4-year-old? "Because sometimes people need time to think, and I need to think about some important things." "About Mama?" "Yes, sweetheart, about Mama." Eleanor's lip trembled. "Are you coming back?" "Of course I am." Rowan pulled her into a hug, breathing in the little girl's smell of her hair. "I promise, I'm just going to visit Mr. Renfrew for a bit." "Okay." She pulled back, looking at him seriously. "Think hard, Papa." Despite everything, Rowan almost smiled. "I will." He kissed her forehead, then stood and picked up his bag. Mira had disappeared somewhere, upstairs, maybe, or the garden. Not there to see him off. Maybe that was better. Rowan walked out to the barn, saddled his horse, and rode away from his home without looking back. The journey to Thomas's farm took less than an hour, but it felt longer. Every step of the horse's hooves seemed to echo with questions he couldn't answer. What did he want? Who was he without his guilt? Could he really learn to see Mira, actually see her? Or was he too broken for that? Thomas was unsurprised to see him. "Lasted about 2 hours, did you?" "She asked me to leave." "Oh, good for her." Thomas took his horse and led it to the barn. "You can stay in the spare room, but I'm not going to let you sit around moping, understand? You're going to work while you're here. Hard work. The kind that makes you too tired to spiral." "I wasn't planning to spiral." "You're always spiraling. It's your natural state." Thomas grinned, but there was sympathy in it. "Come on, let's get you settled." The spare room was small and plain. Bed, chair, window overlooking the fields. Nothing of Rowan's, nothing of anyone's, just a space to exist in. It felt strange, lonely, but also lighter, somehow. Like stepping out of a house that had been slowly suffocating him. That night, Thomas made dinner, badly, because Thomas couldn't cook to save his life, and they ate in comfortable silence. Afterward, they sat on the porch with whiskey, watching the sun go down. "So, what are you going to do?" Thomas asked finally. "I don't know." "That's a start, at least. Admitting you don't know." Thomas took a sip of his drink. "You want my advice? Do I have a choice?" "No. Here it is. Stop trying to figure out how to stop loving Celia. That's not the problem." Rowan frowned. "What do you mean?" "Celia's dead. That's not going to change. And you loved her. That's not going to change either. The problem isn't that you still love her. The problem is you think loving her means you can't love anyone else. Like your heart's only got room for one person, and Celia's ghost is taking up all the space. That's not, isn't it?" Thomas turned to look at him. "You told Mira you see Celia when you're with her. But I bet you don't see Celia when you're working, or talking to Eleanor, or fixing the fence. You only see her in the moments when you're supposed to be connecting with Mira. Which tells me the problem isn't your memory. It's your guilt. You've decided that being happy with Mira is a betrayal, so your brain gives you Celia's face to remind you of what you're doing wrong. Pati iposimbasigin geets." Rowan stared into his whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the last rays of sunlight. "I don't know how to stop that." "You choose to. That's how." Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "Every time your brain tries to pull you back into guilt, you make a choice. You can follow it down that hole, or you can stay present, stay here, with the life you're actually living. And if I can't, then you'll lose Mira, and Eleanor will grow up in a house where her father's a ghost too, just in a different way." Thomas drained his glass. "But I don't think that's going to happen, because as stupid as you've been, I know you love that little girl. And I think, somewhere under all that guilt and grief, you might actually love Mira too." "I don't know if I do." "Then figure it out. That's what you're here for." They sat in silence after that, watching darkness settle over the fields. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, the world going on, indifferent to human struggles. Rowan thought about Mira, tried to picture her without Celia in the way, without the constant comparison, the measuring, the sense that she was always coming up short. What did he actually know about her? She was patient, strong, practical. She'd taken on a grieving widower and his traumatized daughter without complaint, had run the household with quiet efficiency, had loved Eleanor with the fierceness that sometimes surprised him. She had a sharp wit when she let it show. She liked reading, borrowed books from Thomas, from the minister, from anyone who would lend them. She hummed when she cooked. She had a scar on her left hand from a kitchen accident when she was 12. These were facts, pieces of information he'd collected over 2 years. But did he actually know her? Had he ever asked what she wanted, what she dreamed about, what scared her? Or had he just been grateful for her competence and left it at that? The answer shamed him. He spent the next 3 days working himself into exhaustion on Thomas's farm, mending fences, clearing rocks from fields, chopping enough firewood to last through the winter. Physical labor that made his muscles scream and his mind go blessedly quiet. But at night, lying in the spare room with nothing but darkness and his own thoughts, the questions came back. On the 4th day, Thomas found him in the barn and said, "You ready to talk yet?" "Papas, yaman." "About what?" "About what you're actually afraid of." Rowan set down the pitchfork he'd been using. "I'm not afraid." "Liar." Thomas leaned against a stall door. "You're terrified. You've been terrified since Celia died. That's why you married Mira so quickly, because being alone scared you more than being in a loveless marriage." "It's not loveless, isn't it? When's the last time you told her you appreciated her? When's the last time you asked about her day, or noticed when she was sad, or did something just because it would make her happy?" Rowan opened his mouth, then closed it again. He couldn't remember. "Yeah," Thomas said quietly. "That's what I thought. I'm a terrible husband. Oh, us. You're a grieving one. There's a difference." Thomas straightened up. "But grief isn't an excuse anymore, Rowan. Not after 3 years. At some point, you have to choose. Stay broken, or fix yourself. And if I don't know how, then you learn. You try. You fail, and try again until you figure it out." Thomas's expression softened. "But you can't do it here. You need to go home. Mira said not to come back until—" "I know what she said, and you've had 4 days to think, so have you figured it out?" Had he? Rowan thought about Mira's face when he'd confessed, the way the light had gone out of her eyes, like he'd snuffed a candle, the quiet dignity with which she'd withdrawn, not screaming or throwing things, just disappearing inside herself. He thought about Eleanor asking why Mama didn't smile the same. He thought about the house that felt empty even when everyone was inside, and he realized he didn't want that, any of it. He wanted Mira to look at him without walls in her eyes. He wanted Eleanor to stop worrying about whether her parents were going to fall apart. He wanted to walk into his own home and feel like he belonged there. But more than that, and this was the part that scared him, he wanted to know Mira, really know her, not as the woman who'd stepped into Celia's place, but as herself, her own person, with her own thoughts and dreams and fears. He wanted a chance to love her without ghosts in the way. "Yeah," Rowan said finally, "I think I have." Thomas grinned. "About damn time. Now get out of here. You've got a wife to grovel to." Rowan rode home as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The fields looked golden in the fading light, familiar and strange at the same time. When he reached the house, he found Mira in the garden, pulling weeds with methodical precision. She heard the horse and looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "You're back." "I'm back." Rowan dismounted, tied the horse to the fence. "Can we talk? Have you figured it out?" "Some of it, maybe." He took a breath. "Enough to know that I've been the worst kind of fool, and you deserve better than what I've given you." Mira stood up slowly, brushing dirt off her skirt. "I don't want an apology, Rowan. I told you that." "I know, but I'm going to give you one anyway, because you need to hear it." He moved closer, stopping a few feet away, close enough to see her face clearly, far enough to give her space. "I'm sorry, not just for what I said during Eleanor's illness, but for everything before that. For being so wrapped up in my own grief that I never saw you. For treating you like a solution instead of a person. For making you feel like you had to be perfect to earn a place in this house." Mira's jaw tightened. "Is that it?" "No." Rowan forced himself to keep going. "I'm sorry for comparing you to Celia. for holding you up against a memory and finding you wanting, when the truth is you're nothing like her, and that's not a bad thing. It's just different. You're different, and I should have celebrated that instead of resenting it. Silence stretched between them. Mira's eyes were dark, unreadable. "And?" she said finally. "And I want to try again. Properly this time. Not as a widower looking for someone to fill a hole, but as a man who wants to know his wife. Who wants to build something real instead of living in the shadow of what was." Pretty words. "I know, that's why I'm not asking you to forgive me, not yet." Rowan swallowed hard. "I'm asking for a chance to prove them, to show you that I can be better, that I want to be better, for you, for Eleanor, for myself." Mira studied him for a long moment. Then, very quietly, she said, "Why now? What changed in 4 days?" "I did. Or started to, anyway." Rowan ran a hand through his hair. "Thomas helped. Made me see that I've been using guilt as an excuse not to live. And you telling me to leave was the kick I needed to actually think instead of just existing. So I should have kicked you out sooner?" It might have been a joke. Rowan couldn't tell. "Probably," he admitted. Another silence. This one felt different. Not quite softer, but less hostile. Like maybe, possibly, there was a crack in the wall between them. Then Mira said something that made his heart stop. "I need to know what really happened to Celia." Rowan went very still. "What? You heard me?" Mira's voice was steady, but her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You've been carrying guilt for 3 years. I need to know why. I need to understand what you think you did wrong, so I can decide if you're actually responsible or if you're just punishing yourself for being human. Mira, tell me, all of it. No more hiding behind apologies or vague confessions. I want the truth." And Rowan, terrified, exhausted, desperate, told her. He told her about the strap. They stood in the garden while the last light drained from the sky, and Rowan spoke words he'd never said out loud to anyone. About noticing the worn leather 3 weeks before Celia died. About meaning to fix it and forgetting. About coming home to find her saddle empty on Tempest's back, the strap dangling in 2 pieces like an accusation. About finding Celia in the field with her head bleeding and her eyes already glassy. Mira listened without interrupting. Her face stayed neutral, but her hands slowly unclenched as he talked. And when he finished, voice raw, throat tight, she was quiet for a long time. "So you think you killed her?" she said finally. "I might as well have." "Because you forgot to fix a strap." "Because I was negligent. Because I knew it needed doing, and I put it off, and she died because of it." Mira tilted her head, studying him in the growing darkness. "Did Celia know the strap was worn?" "Or is Shasam?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "The strap. Did she know it was worn? Had you mentioned it to her?" Rowan opened his mouth, then closed it. Thought back. Yes. I told her not to use that saddle until I fixed it. And she used it anyway. He stopped. She was in a hurry that day. Said she'd be careful. So she made a choice." Mira's voice was clinical, detached, like she was working through a problem instead of discussing his dead wife. "She knew the risk and chose to ride anyway. That doesn't absolve me, doesn't it?" Mira stepped closer, and there was something sharp in her eyes now, something almost angry. "You've spent 3 years flagellating yourself over an accident, over a decision someone else made, and you've used that guilt to punish everyone around you, including me, including Eleanor, because it's easier than admitting the truth." "What truth?" "That you didn't kill her. Life did. Random, meaningless chance. And you've been so busy playing the tragic widower that you never stopped to ask if maybe, just maybe, you're using guilt as an excuse not to move on." The words hit like a slap. Rowan took a step back. "That's not fair." "Boy, tiring." "Fair?" Mira laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair? I've spent 2 years trying to love a man who sees a ghost every time he looks at me. I've raised your daughter like my own, run your house, shared your bed, and asked for nothing in return except basic respect. And you couldn't even give me that because you were too busy mourning a woman who made her own choices." "Mira, I'm not done." She cut him off, voice hard. "You know what I think? I think you don't actually feel guilty about the strap. I think you feel guilty about being alive when she's not, about having a life that goes on without her, about being happy, or potentially happy, when she never got that chance. And that's why you see her face when you're with me, because happiness feels like betrayal. Rowan stared at her, words dying in his throat, because she was right, again, always right. So here's what's going to happen. Mira's voice was cold now, controlled. I'm going to find out the truth. The real truth. Not your guilt-soaked version of it, but what actually happened. And then we're going to decide, both of us, whether this marriage is worth saving. How are you going to— Oh, I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. She turned and walked toward the house, then paused at the door. You can sleep in the spare room tonight. Tomorrow we start over, or we end this. But either way, no more ghosts. She went inside and closed the door behind her. Rowan stood alone in the garden as full darkness fell, feeling like he'd just been gutted. The next morning, Mira was gone before he woke up. Rowan found Eleanor at the kitchen table eating toast and looking worried. Where's Mama? She went to town, Eleanor said around a mouthful of bread. She said she had errands. Errands. Right. Rowan poured himself coffee and tried not to think about what kind of errands involved leaving at dawn. He spent the morning doing chores, his mind churning. What had Mira meant about finding the truth? What truth was there to find? Celia had died. The strap had broken. He'd been negligent. Those were facts, weren't they? Around midday, Thomas rode up looking grim. Your wife was at my place this morning, he said without preamble. Rowan set down the axe he'd been using to split wood. What? Us? So. She wanted to know everything I remembered about Celia's accident, every detail. Thomas dismounted, tied his horse. She asked questions like a prosecutor. Where exactly did it happen? What condition the saddle was in? Whether I'd ever noticed the strap being worn. What did you tell her? The truth. That I'd seen Celia use that saddle plenty of times, and she knew damn well it needed fixing. That you'd told her not to use it, that she was reckless and always had been. Thomas's expression softened. I also told her you'd been beating yourself up over it for 3 years for no good reason. It's not for no reason. It is, and Mira knows it. Question is whether you're ready to accept it. Thomas studied him. She's not done, by the way. She left my place saying she was going to talk to Doc Morrison next. The doctor? The one who examined Celia after she died. She wants to know exactly what killed her. Thomas paused. She's building a case, Rowan, against your guilt, whether you like it or not. After Thomas left, Rowan couldn't focus on anything. He tried working, tried reading to Eleanor, tried cooking dinner and made a mess of it so badly that Eleanor gently suggested maybe they should wait for Mama. Mira returned just after sunset, looking exhausted but determined. She had a leather satchel over her shoulder that she set down carefully on the kitchen table. Did you eat? She asked Eleanor. Papa tried to make stew. It was bad. I'm sure it was. Mira glanced at Rowan, expression unreadable. There's bread and cheese. That'll do for tonight. She fed Eleanor, put her to bed, and came back downstairs to find Rowan still sitting at the table, staring at the satchel like it might explode. You talked to Thomas, he said, and Doc Morrison, and Mrs. Halstead, who saw Celia riding that morning, and the saddler in town who keeps records of all the repairs he's done. Mira sat down across from him, pulled papers from the satchel. I've been investigating your guilt, Rowan. And you know what I found? What? That you're wrong about almost everything. She spread the papers across the table, notes in her careful handwriting, a diagram of the field where Celia had fallen, a letter from the doctor. Doc Morrison said Celia didn't die from the fall. Not directly. Mira tapped the letter. She had a skull fracture, yes, but what killed her was bleeding in the brain. He said even if she'd fallen in front of the house, even if you'd been right there, she probably wouldn't have survived. The injury was too severe. Rowan's breath caught. That's not— It is. I asked him 3 times to be sure. He said the rock she hit was sharp, caught her at exactly the wrong angle. Freak accident. Nothing you could have prevented. But the strap was worn, but not dangerously so. The saddler said he'd examined it after the accident. You brought it to him, remember? Mira pulled out another paper. He said it should have held, that it breaking when it did was unusual. Bad luck, not negligence. Then why did it break? Because Celia was riding hard. Mrs. Halstead saw her that morning, said she was galloping across the fields like always. The saddler thinks the strap was fine for normal use, but Celia never did anything normally. Mira's voice was gentle now, but firm. She pushed too hard, went too fast, and the strap gave way. Not because you didn't fix it, because she was reckless. Rowan stared at the papers, feeling something crack open inside his chest. You can't know that for certain. No. But I know what the evidence says, and I know you've been carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you. Mira leaned forward. You didn't kill her, Rowan. An accident killed her. A stupid, meaningless accident that had nothing to do with whether you fixed a strap 3 weeks earlier. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Her voice hardened. You've been using guilt as a shield. As long as you blame yourself, you don't have to face the real problem, that Celia died and you didn't. And you don't know how to live with that, so you punish yourself. You sabotage anything good that comes into your life. And you tell yourself it's because you don't deserve happiness, when really, you're just scared of it. The words landed like blows. Rowan wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain that she was wrong. But he couldn't, because somewhere in his gut, in a place he'd been avoiding for 3 years, he knew she was right. I don't know how to stop, he said finally, voice breaking. Then learn. Mira gathered up the papers, put them back in the satchel. Because I'm done competing with a ghost, and I'm especially done competing with your guilt. So you need to decide, Rowan, right now. Do you want to keep drowning in the past, or do you want to try living in the present? He stopped, started again. I want to be better, for you, for Eleanor. I just don't know if I can. That's not good enough. Mira stood up. I need you to try. Actually try, not just say pretty words and hope I'll forgive you. I need action, change, proof that you're willing to fight for this marriage instead of letting it die quietly. What do you want me to do? She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, tomorrow, you and I are going to ride out to where Celia died, and you're going to face it, really face it. Not as the place where you failed, but as the place where an accident happened, and you're going to let it go. Terror spiked through him. Mira, I can't. You can, and you will. Because if you can't do that, if you can't stand in that field and accept that it wasn't your fault, then we're done. I can't keep living with a man who's more in love with his guilt than his wife. She walked out before he could respond. Rowan sat alone at the table, staring at the satchel full of evidence that should have absolved him, but somehow made everything worse. Because if he wasn't guilty, what excuse did he have? That night, he barely slept. Lay in the spare room staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine standing in that field again. He hadn't been back since the day after Celia died, when he'd retrieved her body. The thought of going there now, with Mira watching, made him feel sick. But she was right. He knew she was right. If he couldn't face the place where Celia died, he'd never be free of her. The next morning dawned cold and gray, the kind of weather that made everything look washed out and tired. Rowan found Mira in the kitchen, already dressed for riding. Eleanor's at Thomas's, she said without looking at him. I asked him to watch her for the day. You planned this? Yes. She poured coffee, handed him a cup. Drink, then get ready. We leave in 20 minutes. The ride to the field was silent. Mira led the way on her horse, the one Rowan had bought for her after they married, the one she rode competently but without joy, while he followed on his own mount. Not Tempest. He couldn't bring himself to ride Tempest. The field looked the same as it always had. Rolling grass, scattered rocks, a line of trees at the far end. Ordinary, peaceful, except for the place where Celia had died. Mira rode straight to it, as if she'd studied the maps and knew exactly where to go. She dismounted and stood there waiting. Rowan approached slowly, every instinct screaming at him to turn around and ride away. This is it, Mira said quietly. The rock where she hit her head. It was just a rock, gray, weathered, half buried in the ground, Nothing special about it. Rowan stared at it and felt 3 years of guilt and grief and rage well up in his throat. I should have stopped her, he said hoarsely. That morning, I should have physically stopped her from writing. Could you have? Mira's voice was calm. Could you have stopped Celia from doing anything once she'd made up her mind? He wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe he'd had that power. But the truth was simpler and harder. No. Celia had been wild and stubborn and utterly convinced of her own invincibility. She'd never listened to warnings, never slowed down, never believed that bad things could happen to her. That was part of what he'd loved about her, and part of what had killed her. I loved her, he said, the words feeling like they were being torn out of him. I loved her so much, and I couldn't save her. No one could have saved her, Rowan. Not you, not Doc Morrison, not anyone. Mira moved closer to him, her presence steady. And you need to forgive yourself for that. Not because you were wrong, but because holding on to guilt isn't the same as honoring her memory. Then what is? Living. Actually living. Building a life that means something instead of just existing in the shadow of what you lost. Chipim. Rowan looked at the rock, then at the field, then at Mira standing beside him with dirt on her boots and determination in her eyes. And something inside him finally broke. He sank to his knees in the grass and let the grief come. Not the performative kind he'd been carrying for 3 years, but the real thing, raw and ugly and human. He cried for Celia, for the life they'd had and the future they'd never get. For Eleanor, who'd lost a mother. For himself, who'd lost a wife and then spent 3 years punishing everyone around him for it. And he cried for Mira, who'd tried so hard to love a man who couldn't see her. Mira knelt beside him, not touching, just present, letting him break apart without trying to fix it. When the storm finally passed, Rowan sat back on his heels, exhausted. I'm sorry, he said. I know. I've been so stupid. I know that too. She paused. But stupid can be fixed, if you're willing to do the work. He looked at her then, really looked. Saw the woman who'd investigated his past like a detective, who'd forced him to confront the truth he'd been avoiding, who'd stood by him even when he'd given her every reason to leave. Saw Mira, not Celia, not a replacement or a consolation prize, just Mira. Teach me, he said quietly. Teach me how to see you, how to be the husband you deserve instead of the ghost I've been. I can't teach you that, you have to choose it. She stood up, offered him her hand. But I can give you a chance, if you're willing to take it. He took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. They stood together in the field where Celia had died, and for the first time in 3 years, Rowan didn't feel her presence, didn't see her face or hear her voice. There was just the wind, and the grass, and Mira's hand in his. What now? He asked. Now we go home. And tomorrow you start proving you mean what you say. Mira's grip tightened. But there's one more thing you need to do first. What? She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather strap, worn, broken in the middle, the piece that had come off Celia's saddle. You kept this, Mira said. Thomas told me. You've had it in your workbench for 3 years, wrapped in cloth like a relic. Rowan's throat went tight. I couldn't throw it away. I know, but you need to now. She held it out to him. You need to let it go. Literally. He stared at the strap, at the broken leather that had taken on so much meaning in his mind, the physical proof of his failure, his negligence, his guilt, except it wasn't any of those things. It was just a piece of worn leather that had failed at the worst possible moment. Accidents happened. People died. Life was fragile and random and terrifyingly unfair. And holding on to a broken strap wouldn't change any of that. Rowan took it from Mira's hand, felt the weight of it, so light, so insignificant, and realized how much power he'd given it. What should I do with it? Whatever you need to. Bury it, burn it, throw it in the river, just let it go. He walked to the edge of the field where a small creek ran through, stood there for a long moment holding the strap. Then he threw it as hard as he could. It arced through the air and landed in the water with a small splash. The current caught it, pulled it downstream, and within seconds it was gone. Rowan stood there, breathing hard, waiting to feel something, relief maybe, or peace. Instead, he just felt empty, hollow. But it was a different kind of hollow than before. Not the sucking void of grief, but the blank space left behind when you finally put down a weight you've been carrying too long. Room to fill with something new. He turned back to Mira, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Better?" she asked. "I don't know yet." He walked back to her. "Ask me again in a month." "I will." She moved to her horse, mounted smoothly. "Come on, Eleanor will be wondering where we are." They rode back in silence, but it was different now. Not the tense, angry silence of the past weeks, but something quieter, thoughtful. When they reached the house, Thomas was on the porch with Eleanor, who immediately ran to Mira. "Did you and Papa fix things?" Mira glanced at Rowan, something complicated crossing her face. "We're working on it," she said finally. "It's going to take time." "That's okay." Eleanor grabbed her hand. "Aunt Clara says good things take time." "Your Aunt Clara is very wise." Thomas caught Rowan's eye and raised an eyebrow, a silent question. Rowan gave a small nod. "Not fixed, not yet, but better. Maybe." After Thomas left, Mira put Eleanor to bed while Rowan made tea. When she came back downstairs, he handed her a cup and said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For fighting for this marriage even when I wasn't." He paused. "For showing me that I've been wrong about almost everything." "Mom, wams." "You weren't wrong about everything." Mira sipped her tea. "You were right about one thing." "What?" "That you owe me honesty, real honesty. Not the performative kind where you confess your sins and expect absolution. The hard kind, where you tell me things you don't want to say because they're true and I need to hear them." "Okay." Rowan set down his cup. "Then, here's honest. I'm scared. I'm terrified that I've broken this so badly I can't fix it. That you'll wake up one day and realize you're better off without me. That I'll try my hardest and it still won't be enough." "Good." He blinked. "Good?" "Fear means you care. Means you're invested in the outcome instead of just going through the motions." Mira set down her own cup. "And for what it's worth, I'm scared too. I'm scared I've wasted 2 years on a man who'll never really see me. That I'll keep trying and you'll keep failing, and eventually I'll have to choose between my dignity and my marriage. I won't fail. I'm sure." "Well, you might. People do." Her voice was soft but firm. "But at least if you fail while actually trying, I'll know it wasn't for lack of effort. That's all I'm asking for, Rowan. Effort. Real, honest effort. You'll have it, I promise. Don't promise, just do." She stood up, and for a moment Rowan thought she was going back to the spare room. But instead, she paused at the foot of the stairs. "I'm sleeping in our room tonight," she said without looking at him. "But on my side. You stay on yours, and don't—" She stopped. "Don't touch me unless I ask. Not yet, I need time." "Of course." She went upstairs. Rowan waited a few minutes, then followed. The bedroom felt different with both of them in it. More crowded, more tense, but also somehow more alive than it had been in weeks. Rowan lay on his side of the bed, careful to leave space between them, and stared at the ceiling. Beside him, Mira's breathing slowly evened out. He wanted to say something, wanted to reach across the distance and prove he'd changed, but Thomas's voice echoed in his head. "Don't promise, just do." So instead of talking, Rowan made a decision. Tomorrow, he would start showing Mira who he could be. Not with grand gestures or empty words, but with the small, daily choices that proved he meant what he said. He would ask about her day and actually listen. He would notice when she was tired and offer to help. He would look at her, really look, and see the woman who'd saved him from drowning in his own guilt. And maybe, if he was lucky and worked hard enough and didn't screw it up too badly, she'd let him love her properly. Not as a replacement, not as a consolation, as Mira. He fell asleep with that thought, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't dream of Celia. But in the morning, when he woke to find Mira's side of the bed empty and cold, panic spiked through him. He found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a letter in her hands. Her face was white. "What's wrong?" She looked up at him, and the fear in her eyes made his blood run cold. "It's from Clara," she said quietly. "My mother's sick. Dying, maybe. She wants me to come home." The letter sat between them on the table like something poisonous. Rowan stared at it, then at Mira's face, pale, drawn, the careful composure she'd worn for weeks finally cracking. "When do you need to leave?" he asked. "Soon. Today? If I can." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. They trembled slightly as she folded the letter. "Clara says she's been ill for weeks, but didn't want to worry me while Eleanor was sick. Now she's—" Mira's voice caught. "She's asking for me." Rowan's mind raced. Mira's mother lived 3 days' journey away, in a small town near the coast. 3 days there, however long she stayed, 3 days back. A week at minimum. Maybe 2, and they'd just started to repair things. "I'll come with you," he said. Mira looked up sharply. "What?" "You and Eleanor, I'll come with you. The farm can wait." "The farm absolutely cannot wait. It's almost harvest." She shook her head. "No, you need to stay. I'll take Eleanor and you're not going alone." "I've traveled alone before." "Not like this. Not when you're upset." Rowan reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. "Please, let me do this." For a moment, something flickered in Mira's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. Then the walls came back up. "What about the farm? Thomas can manage it. He owes me after all the times I've helped him." Rowan stood up. "I'll ride over now, ask him. You pack whatever you and Eleanor need. We can leave by midday." "Rowan, this isn't up for debate." His voice was firm but not harsh. "You said you wanted action, not words. This is action. I'm not letting you face this alone." Mira stared at him for a long moment. Then very quietly she said, "Thank you." By noon, they were on the road. Thomas had agreed immediately, actually seemed relieved to have something useful to do. Eleanor was thrilled at the prospect of an adventure, chattering excitedly about seeing Grandmama and Aunt Clara and maybe the ocean if they had time. Mira rode in silence, her face drawn with worry. Rowan watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, noticed the way she held herself too straight, too careful, like she was afraid of breaking. Noticed the way she'd automatically packed his clothes along with hers and Eleanor's, even though she'd been angry at him just yesterday. Small things, but they mattered. The first night, they stopped at an inn halfway to the coast. One room was all they could afford, 2 beds, clean but sparse. Eleanor fell asleep almost immediately, worn out from the journey. Mira sat by the window, staring out at nothing. "You should rest," Rowan said quietly. "I can't." "When did you last sleep properly?" She didn't answer. Rowan moved closer, not touching, just present. "Tell me about your mother." "Why?" "Because I don't know her. Because you're scared, and I want to understand why." Mira was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "She's strong, stubborn, raised me and Clara on her own after our father died. Never complained, never asked for help, just did what needed doing." Her voice wavered. "If she's asking for me, it means she's really dying. She wouldn't summon me for anything less. Then we'll get there in time. You can't know that." "Oh, no. But I can make sure you're not alone when we do." Mira turned to look at him then, and something in her expression shifted. Not softening, exactly, but opening, just a crack. "Why are you doing this, Shiki?" she asked. "Really? Is it guilt? Obligation? Another attempt to fix what you broke?" "All of those things, probably." Rowan met her eyes. "But also because I meant what I said. I want to be better. And that starts with showing up when you need me, not just when it's convenient." Pretty words again. "Not words. Action." He gestured around the room. "I'm here, aren't I? Could have stayed home. Let you go alone. But I'm here. For now. For as long as you need." Mira studied him, and for the first time in weeks, Rowan felt like she was actually seeing him. Not the ghost he'd been, not the husband she'd hoped for, but the man he was trying to become. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she said finally. "I won't. Amen." She turned back to the window. After a moment, Rowan went to his own bed and lay down fully clothed, giving her space. But just before he fell asleep, he heard her voice. Very soft. "Thank you for coming." He didn't answer. Just let the words settle between them like a fragile peace. They reached the coast town on the 3rd day, exhausted and travel-worn. Mira's childhood home was a small cottage near the docks, weathered by salt air and time. Clara met them at the door, her face pale and pinched with worry. "You're here, thank heavens." She pulled Mira into a fierce hug. "She's upstairs. She's been asking for you." "How bad is it?" "Bad." Clara glanced at Rowan, then at Eleanor. "But she's lucid, that's something." Mira handed Eleanor to Clara. "Keep her downstairs for now. I don't want her to see—" She stopped. "Just keep her busy." "Of course." Mira climbed the stairs alone. Rowan started to follow, then stopped. This wasn't his moment. His place was down here, helping with Eleanor, staying out of the way. But Clara caught his arm. "Go with her." "She didn't ask." "She won't ask. She never asks for help, but she needs it." Clara's grip tightened. "Please, don't let her face this alone." So Rowan followed Mira up the narrow stairs to a small bedroom that smelled of sickness and old lavender. Mira's mother lay in the bed, shrunken and pale, but her eyes were bright when she saw her daughter. "Mira, my girl." "Mama." Mira knelt beside the bed, taking her mother's hand. "I'm here. I'm here." "Good. That's good." The old woman's gaze shifted to Rowan, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "And this is your husband?" "Yes?" "Rowan, come closer. Let me look at you." Rowan approached the bed, feeling suddenly like a boy being examined by a schoolteacher. Mira's mother studied him with sharp eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of Mira's. "You're the widower," she said bluntly. "Yes, ma'am." "You treating my daughter right?" The question hung in the air. Rowan could have lied. Could have said yes, of course, everything's fine. Instead, he said, "Not as well as I should, but I'm trying to do better." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "Honest, at least. That's something." She turned back to Mira. "He'll do, I suppose." "Mama." "Don't argue with a dying woman." But there was humor in her voice, faint but real. "Now sit. Tell me about Eleanor. Clara says she had a fever." Mira sat on the edge of the bed and talked. About Eleanor's illness, about the farm, about small, ordinary things that made her mother smile and occasionally laugh. Rowan stood by the window, trying to be invisible, but watching the two women with something like awe. This was where Mira had learned to be strong, to carry burdens without complaint, to love fiercely and quietly. After an hour, the old woman's energy flagged. She shooed them out with a weak wave. "Go, I need to rest. Come back tonight." In the hallway, Mira sagged against the wall. "She looks so small," she whispered. Rowan didn't know what to say. So instead of speaking, he did something he hadn't done in months. He pulled Mira into his arms and held her. For a moment, she was stiff, resistant. Then very slowly, she let herself lean into him. She didn't cry. Mira didn't cry easily. But she held on to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that was suddenly shifting under her feet. "I'm not ready to lose her," she said into his shoulder. "I know. She's all I have left, her and Clara. Kid, you have Eleanor." "Eleanor isn't mine." "Not really." The word stung. Rowan pulled back just enough to see her face. "She loves you. That makes her yours." "Does it?" Mira's eyes were dark, searching. "Or is she just something else I borrowed from your old life?" "She's your daughter, not Celia's. Yours." Rowan's voice was firm. "You're the one who reads to her at night, who comforts her when she's scared, who makes her laugh. That's not borrowed. That's earned." "Mame dit." Them. Mira looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." "Okay." They went downstairs to find Clara entertaining Eleanor with stories about Mira as a child, wild and stubborn and always getting into trouble, which delighted Eleanor to no end. "Mama was naughty?" Eleanor asked, eyes wide. "The worst," Clara said solemnly. "Once she climbed onto the roof and couldn't get down. We had to call the neighbors with a ladder." "I was 7, Mira protested, but she was almost smiling. "You were a terror," Clara corrected, "and Mama loved you anyway." The almost smile faded. Mira looked away. That night, Mira's mother was weaker. They sat with her, Mira on one side of the bed, Rowan on the other, while Clara kept Eleanor occupied downstairs. "I want to tell you something," the old woman said to Mira. Her voice was thin, breathy. "Something I should have said before."
"What, Mama?
You don't have to be strong all the time. You don't have to carry everything alone. She squeezed Mira's hand weakly. I taught you that. To be independent, to not need anyone. But that was wrong. Needing people isn't weakness. It's human. Mama, Let me finish. The old woman's breathing was labored now. This one, she gestured at Rowan with her free hand. He's broken. I can see it. But broken things can be fixed, and sometimes they're stronger after. Don't give up on him just because he's cracked. Rowan's throat went tight. I won't, Mira said quietly. Good. That's good. The old woman closed her eyes. I'm tired now, but I'll see you in the morning. Don't look at me like that. I'm not dying tonight. I'm stubborn. Runs in the family. She was right. She lasted 3 more days. 3 days of sitting vigil, of watching her slowly fade, of Mira being strong and calm and capable, right up until the moment her mother took her last breath. Then she shattered. Rowan caught her as she folded, held her while she sobbed into his chest, brutal, tearing cries that seemed to rip something vital out of her. Clara cried too, quieter, while Eleanor watched from the doorway with wide, frightened eyes. Rowan held Mira through it all, didn't try to fix it or stop it, just held her and let her break. Afterward, when the tears had run dry and the silence felt suffocating, Mira pulled away. I need to make arrangements, she said, voice hoarse. The funeral, the house, her things. We'll handle it together. Rowan, together, he repeated. You're not doing this alone. And he meant it. Over the next 2 days, he helped Clara make arrangements while Mira sat with her mother's body, saying goodbye in her own quiet way. He dealt with the minister, the gravedigger, the neighbor women who brought food and condolences. He kept Eleanor occupied, explained death in simple terms that didn't terrify her, let her ask questions without getting impatient. He did what needed doing, without being asked, without expecting praise. Just showed up. The funeral was small. Mira spoke briefly, voice steady but eyes red-rimmed. Clara broke down halfway through her own words and had to stop. Rowan stood beside Mira, close enough to touch, but not touching, just present. Afterward, at the cottage, while Clara and Eleanor napped upstairs, Mira stood in the small kitchen and said, I don't know what to do with this. With what? Her house, her things. She left it all to me and Clara, but Clara lives 2 towns over, and She stopped. I don't know if I'm coming back. The words landed like a stone in deep water. Rowan went very still. What do you mean? Mira turned to face him. Her eyes were red but dry now, and there was something in them he'd never seen before. Determination. Decision. I've been thinking, she said slowly, about what you said in the field, about guilt and grief and punishment, about whether what we have is worth saving. Mira, shit. Let me finish. She took a breath. I married you because I thought I could help, thought I could be what you needed. But I've spent 2 years trying to be perfect, trying to earn a place in your life, and it's made me miserable. I've lost myself. I don't even know who I am anymore, separate from being your wife or Eleanor's mother. You're Mira, Rowan said desperately. You're smart and strong and what? What am I, Rowan? Not what I do for you. Not the roles I fill. Who am I as a person? He opened his mouth and realized he didn't have an answer. Not a real one. Mira's laugh was bitter. That's what I thought. Then tell me. Tell me who you are, and You'll what? Learn to love me properly? She shook her head. That's not how this works. You can't love someone you don't actually know. And you don't know me. Not really. Because I've been too busy being perfect to let you see the real me. Then stop being perfect. The words came out harder than Rowan intended. Stop hiding behind competence and let me see you. Let me learn who you actually are. Why? So you can compare me to Celia and find me wanting? No. So I can stop comparing you at all. Rowan stepped closer. I went to that field with you. I let go of the strap. I'm trying, Mira. I know I've been terrible, and I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. Please. Mira stared at him for a long moment. Then she said something that made his heart stop. Give me one reason, one real, honest reason why this marriage is worth saving, and not because of Eleanor or the farm or because divorce is difficult. One reason that's about us, about you and me. The question hung between them like a challenge. Rowan's mind raced. What could he say that would be enough? What reason could possibly justify everything he'd put her through? Then he realized there was no perfect answer, no magic words that would fix everything. There was only honesty. "Because I want to know you," he said quietly. "I want to know what makes you laugh when you think no one's listening. I want to know why you hum that one song when you cook and what you dream about when you stare out the window. I want to know what scares you, what excites you, what you'd do if you could do anything in the world without worrying about being perfect." He paused. "I want to know you, Mira. Not Celia, not some idealized version, just you. And I want you to know me too, not as the tragic widower or the man who failed, but as whoever I am underneath all that. I want us to actually build something real instead of living in the ruins of what was." Silence fell. Mira's eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying, just listening. "That's not enough," she said finally. Rowan's heart sank. "But it's a start." She wiped her eyes roughly. "I'm not promising anything. I'm not saying everything's fixed, but—" She took a shaky breath. "I'm willing to try. Actually try. Not just go through the motions or be the perfect wife. Try to build something real. Okay? But things have to change, really change. Not just words, Rowan. Action. What do you need? I need you to talk to me. Actually talk. About your day, your feelings, your fears. I need you to ask me questions and listen to the answers. I need you to see me when you look at me, not just recognize that I'm there." Maishi. She paused. "And I need you to stop punishing yourself for being alive. Because I can't compete with your guilt any more than I could compete with Celia's memory. You have to choose to let it go." "I did. At the field. I threw away the strap. That was symbolic. I'm talking about the daily choice. Every morning when you wake up, you have to choose to live instead of just exist. To be present instead of drowning in the past. Can you do that?" Could he? Rowan thought about the past 3 years, the weight he'd carried, the way it had shaped every decision, every interaction, every moment of his life. Could he really let it go? Then he thought about Mira, standing in this kitchen that smelled like death and old memories, asking him for one honest reason. Thought about Eleanor, who deserved a father who was actually present. Thought about the man he'd been before Celia died. Not perfect, but not drowning either. That man was still in there somewhere, buried maybe, broken, but still there. "I can try," he said. "I can't promise I'll do it perfectly. I can't promise I won't fail sometimes, but I can promise I'll keep trying, every day, for however long it takes." Mira studied him for a long moment. Then very slowly she nodded. "Okay. Okay? Don't make me repeat myself." But there was something almost soft in her voice now, almost hopeful. "We'll go home. We'll try. And if it doesn't work, if you can't actually change, or if I can't stop being angry, then we'll face that honestly. No more pretending." "No more pretending," Rowan agreed. They stood in the kitchen of Mira's dead mother's house, and for the first time since their wedding, Rowan felt like they were actually on the same side. Not fixed, not healed, but fighting together instead of against each other. It was something. They stayed another week, helping Clara sort through their mother's belongings and settle the house. Rowan worked without complaint, lifting heavy furniture, making repairs, being useful, but he also did something else. He asked Mira questions, small ones at first. "What was your favorite thing about this house? What did your mother teach you that you use every day? If you could live anywhere, where would it be?" Mira answered cautiously at first, like she was testing whether he was really listening. But gradually, as he kept asking and actually paying attention to the answers, she opened up. She told him about wanting to travel when she was young, about learning to read with her mother's help, about the garden she'd always wanted but never had room for. Simple things, ordinary things. But they mattered, and Rowan told her things too, about missing his brother, who died when they were boys, about being terrified he'd fail as a father, about the farm he'd inherited and sometimes resented. They talked more that week than they had in 2 years of marriage, and something began to shift. On their last night before heading home, Rowan found Mira on the small porch, staring out at the ocean in the distance. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much in my head." He sat beside her, not too close. "Want to talk about it?" "I'm scared," she admitted, "that we'll go home and fall back into old patterns, that this She gestured between them. Won't last. It might not, Rowan said honestly. We might get home and realize we don't actually know how to do this, but we can try anyway. And if trying isn't enough, then at least we'll know we actually tried, that we fought for it instead of just letting it die quietly. He paused. I know I've given you every reason not to trust me, but I meant what I said. I want this to work. I want us to work. Mira turned to look at him. Why? Because I'm tired of being alone. Because Eleanor deserves better. Because you deserve better. He met her eyes, and because when I think about the future now, I can actually see you in it, not as a replacement, not as someone standing in Celia's shadow, just you. Do you really see me? I'm starting to. And what I see, he stopped, searching for words. What I see is someone stronger than I ever was. Someone who fights for what matters. Someone who loved my daughter when she didn't have to. Someone who investigated my past like a detective and forced me to face truths I'd been avoiding for years. He smiled slightly. Someone kind of terrifying, actually. Despite everything, Mira almost laughed. Terrifying? In the best way. Yes. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant sound of waves. Then Mira said, very quietly, I see you too. Finally. Not the ghost you've been. Not the man I wanted you to be. Just you. Broken and trying. Human. Is that enough? I don't know yet. She stood up, offered him her hand. But I'm willing to find out. Rowan took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. They went inside together, and for the first time in months, they slept in the same bed without a wall of tension between them. Not touching, not quite comfortable, but together. The journey home took 4 days. One longer than the trip out, because they weren't rushing this time. They stopped early each night, let Eleanor play instead of pushing through, talked around the campfire about everything and nothing. It felt strange, new, like they were courting instead of married, but it also felt right. When they finally reached the farm, Thomas was waiting on the porch. Everything all right? Rowan asked as they dismounted. Fine, harvest's coming along. I've got something to show you, though. Thomas glanced at Mira, something meaningful in his expression. Both of you. He led them to the barn where a new stall had been built in the corner. Inside was a young mare, Chestnut, with a white blaze. What's this? Mira asked. Your horse, Thomas said. Well, will be. If you want her. She's young, needs training, but she's got good lines. Thought maybe you'd like something that was actually yours, not borrowed, not shared, just yours. Mira stared at the horse, then at Thomas, then at Rowan. Did you? Thomas's idea, Rowan said quickly. But I agree with it. You should have something that's just yours. Mira's eyes were suddenly wet. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep her, Thomas said gruffly. I'll help you train her. Could use a project. Yes, I'll keep her. Mira moved closer to the stall and the mare came over to sniff her hand. She's beautiful. She's stubborn, Thomas corrected. Like someone else I know. Mira shot him a look, but she was smiling. After Thomas left, Rowan helped Mira settle the horse properly. They worked in comfortable silence, brushing her down, making sure she had water and feed. When they finished, Mira turned to Rowan and said, Thank you. For what? It was Thomas's, for coming with me, for helping with my mother, for asking questions and actually listening to the answers, for, she paused, for trying. You asked me to. I know, but you didn't have to listen. You could have stayed home. Let me handle it alone like I've handled everything else. But you didn't. She took a breath. That matters. Good. Because I'm planning to keep doing it. Keep what? Showing up, trying, being the husband you actually deserve instead of the ghost I've been. Mira studied him for a long moment. Then she did something that shocked them both. She stepped forward and kissed him. Not passionately, not desperately, just, simply. A kiss that said, I see you. I'm here. We're trying. When she pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Don't read too much into that, Mira said. We're not fixed. We're still... I know, Rowan interrupted. We're still broken, still figuring it out, but we're trying together. That's enough for now. Is it? It has to be. Mira nodded slowly. Then she smiled. Not the careful, controlled smile she'd worn for 2 years, but something real and crooked and entirely hers. Okay, she said. Let's go home. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when Eleanor ran out to meet them, Mira scooped her up without hesitation. Did you see my new horse? Mira asked. Mr. Thomas said she's for you. She is. Would you like to help me name her? Eleanor's eyes went wide. Really? Really. Rowan watched them together, his daughter and his wife, talking excitedly about horse names, and felt something shift inside his chest. Not healing, not yet, but the first real hint that maybe, possibly, they could actually build something worth keeping. That night, after Eleanor was asleep, Mira found Rowan in the kitchen making tea. I have something to tell you, she said. His heart jumped. What? I talked to Clara before we left about my mother's house. Mira took the cup he offered her. We're selling it, splitting the money, and I'm using my half to build a greenhouse. Here, for the garden I've always wanted. You don't need my permission for that. I know, but I wanted you to know. I'm staying, Rowan, not because I have to. Not because I don't have anywhere else to go, but because I'm choosing to. I'm choosing this. She paused. I'm choosing us. Even though we're still broken, even though I'm still angry sometimes, I'm choosing to try. Rowan set down his own cup very carefully, afraid that if he moved too fast, he'd break whatever fragile thing was forming between them. I'm choosing us too, he said quietly, and I promise, every day, I'll keep choosing it until you believe me. And then I'll keep choosing it anyway. Mira smiled. That same real, crooked smile that was entirely hers. Okay, she said. Then let's get to work. The work started the next morning. Not grand gestures, not dramatic declarations, just small, deliberate choices that added up to something bigger. Rowan woke early and made breakfast, badly, because he'd forgotten how much salt went into porridge. But Mira ate it without complaint and showed him the right measurements for next time. He asked about her plans for the greenhouse. She told him, and he listened without interrupting, without trying to fix or improve, just absorbing the information like it mattered. Because it did. Eleanor noticed the change first. Children always did. You're smiling more, Mama, she said one afternoon while they were working in the garden together. Mira paused, trowel in hand. Am I? Yes. And Papa looks at you different now. How does he look at me? Eleanor scrunched up her face, thinking, like he's trying to remember something important, but in a good way. Mira glanced toward the barn, where Rowan was fixing a fence post. He caught her looking and raised a hand in greeting. She waved back. Yeah, she said quietly. I suppose he does. The greenhouse took shape slowly. Thomas helped with the framing while Rowan and Mira worked on the foundation. They argued about the placement. Mira wanted it closer to the house. Rowan thought it would get better light farther out. But it was a different kind of arguing now, not hostile. Just two people with different opinions trying to find middle ground. They compromised, put it halfway between where each of them had wanted. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. One evening, about 3 weeks after they'd returned from the coast, Mira was reading to Eleanor when Rowan came in from the fields covered in dust and exhaustion. There's stew on the stove, Mira said without looking up from the book. Thanks. I'll wash up first. He started toward the washroom, then stopped, turned back. What's the book about? He asked. Mira glanced up, surprised. It's a fairy tale. Princess and a dragon. Does she slay it or befriend it? Neither. She outsmarts it. Mira's lips twitched. Tricks it into guarding her kingdom instead of destroying it. Clever. Very. She paused. Why do you ask? Because I want to know what my daughter's learning. Because I should have been asking all along. He smiled slightly. Also because I'm curious whether you approve of princesses who manipulate dragons instead of fighting them honestly. Manipulation is honest if everyone knows it's happening, Mira said. It's strategy. That's a very pragmatic view of morality. I'm a very pragmatic person. I'm starting to notice that. Eleanor looked between them, confused but pleased by whatever was happening. Are you going to keep talking, or can Mama finish the story? Sorry, sweetheart. Rowan headed toward the washroom. I'll let you get back to your dragon negotiation. After Eleanor was asleep, Mira found Rowan at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of him. What's this? She asked. Numbers. For the greenhouse. He looked up. I've been thinking, if we use the money from selling that back pasture I mentioned last year, we could afford glass instead of just oiled cloth. It would last longer, keep the heat better. You want to sell the back pasture? It's rocky and hard to work. Been meaning to get rid of it for years. He tapped the papers. This seems like a better use of the money than letting it sit. Mira sat down slowly, studying the figures. This is a lot of money, Rowan. I know. For my greenhouse. For our greenhouse. You'll be doing the planting, but I'll be eating the vegetables. He met her eyes. Besides, you said you wanted something that was yours. This is me helping make that happen. Why? The question was quiet, but weighted. Rowan understood what she was really asking. Why now? Why this? Why are you trying so hard? Because I'm tired of being the man who takes and never gives, he said honestly. Because you deserve something beautiful that makes you happy. Because... He stopped, gathering courage. Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them. Mira went very still. What? I love you. Rowan's voice was steady now, certain. Not the way I love Celia. That was wild and young and reckless. This is different, quieter. But it's real. And I should have said it months ago, but I was too busy drowning to notice what I actually had. Rowan's. You don't have to say it back. I'm not asking you to. I needed you to know. I needed to say it out loud and mean it. He reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. I see you, Mira. Finally. And what I see is someone I don't deserve but want to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve. Mira stared at him, eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. That's a lot of pressure, she said finally. I know. What if I don't love you back? What if I can't? Then I'll keep trying anyway. Keep showing up, keep being better, until maybe someday you do. He paused. Or until you tell me to stop. Either way, I'll respect it. Mira was quiet for a long time, looking at the papers, at him, at her own hands. I don't know if I love you, she said finally. I don't know if what I feel is love or just relief that we're finally being honest with each other. But she took a breath. I want to find out. I want to see what we can build if we're both actually trying. That's enough for me. Is it really? Really? Rowan smiled. Besides, you're terrifying when you're determined. I have faith you'll figure out how you feel eventually. Despite everything, Mira laughed. Terrifying, you keep saying that, because it's true. She shook her head, but she was smiling. That real crooked smile that made Rowan's chest feel tight. Okay, she said. Glass it is. The greenhouse went up over the next month. It was slow work. Rowan had the farm to manage, and Mira had the house and Eleanor and her new horse to train. But they carved out time each day to work on it together. And they talked. Rowan told her about the first time he'd seen Celia, at a dance in town, spinning like she owned the music. About marrying her quickly because she'd been so sure, and he'd been young enough to think being sure was the same as being right. Mira told him about her first proposal, from a banker's son who'd wanted a decorative wife. About turning him down and watching her mother worry she'd end up alone. They talked about Eleanor, about what kind of woman they hoped she'd grow into, about the farm and whether it would be enough to support them long term, about small dreams and large fears and everything in between. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes they argued about money, about Eleanor's bedtime, about whether the greenhouse door should face east or south. Sometimes Rowan caught himself comparing Mira to Celia and had to consciously stop. Sometimes Mira pulled back when things got too intimate, too vulnerable. But they kept trying, and slowly, so slowly Rowan almost didn't notice until it had already happened, the house began to feel different, warmer, lighter, like something heavy had been lifted and they could all breathe easier. Eleanor laughed more, ran around the house singing made-up songs. brought them flowers from the field, and demanded they put them in a vase where everyone could see. She stopped asking if they'd had a fight. 2 months after they'd returned from the coast, Thomas stopped by with his wife Ellen, a quiet woman who smiled easily and had a talent for growing things. "Heard you're building a greenhouse," Ellen said to Mira. "Thought you might want some cuttings from my herbs. They do well in protected spaces." "That's very kind," Mira said, surprised. "Also thought you might want company while you plant them." Ellen glanced at Thomas. "This one's been going on about how you're doing everything alone, and I thought, well, women should stick together." It was the first time anyone from the community had reached out to Mira as a person, rather than Rowan's wife. Mira blinked hard, clearly caught off guard. "I'd like that," she managed. Ellen came by twice a week after that, helped Mira plant herbs and vegetables, taught her tricks for keeping pests away, talked about everything and nothing. Sometimes other women from nearby farms joined them. Mrs. Halstead, who'd seen Celia that last morning. Young Anna Pritchard, newly married and full of questions. Slowly, Mira stopped being the widower's second wife and started being just Mira. Rowan watched it happen and felt something ease in his chest. 3 months after the greenhouse was finished, Rowan was in the barn when he heard shouting. He ran out to find Mira standing in the yard, hands on her hips, glaring at a man on horseback. The stranger was well-dressed, maybe 40, with the kind of face that was used to getting what it wanted. "What's going on?" Rowan asked, moving to stand beside Mira. "This man says he owns the back pasture," Mira said flatly. "The one you sold." Rowan's blood went cold. "What?" The stranger dismounted, pulled out papers. "Gerald Thorpe. I purchased the land 3 months ago through an agent. Was told it was vacant." He gestured toward the greenhouse, which sat partially on what had been the back pasture before they'd renegotiated the boundary. "That structure is on my property." "The hell it is, Rowan said. "I sold the pasture." "Not the area where the greenhouse stands. We redrew the boundary before we started building." "Not according to these papers." Thorpe held them out. Rowan scanned them quickly, his stomach sinking. The legal description was wrong, included too much land, extended too far toward the house. Either the agent had made a mistake, or someone had deliberately altered the boundaries. "This isn't what I agreed to," Rowan said. "Take it up with your agent. I bought in good faith." Thorpe's smile was thin. "But that greenhouse needs to come down. It's on my land." "Like hell," Mira said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. "I beg your pardon?" Thorpe said. "I said like hell. That greenhouse is staying exactly where it is." Mira stepped forward, and there was something in her expression that made Thorpe take a step back. "You bought land based on fraudulent documents. That's not our problem. It's yours. Madam, I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly. You're trying to bully us into giving up something we built with our own hands because your agent screwed up." Her voice was ice. Her voice, "But I investigated my husband's past well enough to know how to investigate a land deed. And I will tear apart every document, every transaction, every signature until I find the proof that those papers are wrong. And then I'll make sure everyone in 3 counties knows you tried to steal from a widow and her family." "I'm not a widow," Rowan said quietly. "You were when we built it. That's how everyone sees it anyway." Mira's eyes never left Thorpe. "So what's it going to be? You walk away now and we pretend this never happened? Or I make your life very difficult for the next 6 months while lawyers sort this out?" Thorpe stared at her, clearly trying to decide if she was bluffing. She wasn't. Rowan could see it in every line of her body, the same determination she'd brought to investigating Celia's death, the same steel she'd shown when she'd forced him to face his guilt. "I'll have my agent review the documents," Thorpe said finally. "If there's been an error, there has been. Then we'll renegotiate the boundary." He mounted his horse stiffly. "You'll hear from me within the week." He rode off without another word. Rowan stood there, still processing what had just happened. "You just threatened a man twice your size with legal action you have no idea how to pursue." "I would have figured it out." Mira turned to him. "Besides, he was wrong. And I wasn't going to let him take our greenhouse." "Our greenhouse?" "Yes, ours." She said it firmly, like daring him to argue. "You paid for it. I planted it. Eleanor plays in it. It's ours." Rowan started laughing. He couldn't help it. The absurdity of watching his wife face down a land grabber with nothing but sheer force of will. It was terrifying and impressive and utterly, completely Mira. "What's so funny?" she demanded. You're terrifying. You keep saying that because it keeps being true." He pulled her into a hug before he could think better of it. "Thank you." "For what?" "For fighting for something that's ours. For not backing down. For being you." He pulled back to look at her. "I love you." Mira's breath caught. "You already said that." "I know, but I wanted to say it again, because it's true, and because you should hear it more than once." "Rowan, you don't have to say it back," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know." Mira stared at him for a long moment. Then she said something that made his heart stop. "I think I might love you too." "Ishi, what tiki bam." "You think?" "I'm still figuring it out, but—" She paused, searching for words. "When he threatened the greenhouse, my first thought wasn't about the plants or the money. It was about you, about how hard you worked on it, about what it meant that you'd built it for me. And I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped seeing you as the broken widower and started seeing you as my husband, actually mine. Not Celia's leftover, not a consolation prize, just mine. Is that love? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it's the beginning of it." She smiled slightly. "Either way, I'm not letting anyone take our greenhouse, or our marriage, or anything else we're building together." Rowan kissed her then, properly, thoroughly, the way he should have been kissing her all along. And Mira kissed him back, not tentatively or out of obligation, but with real feeling. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "We should probably go inside," Mira said. "Probably. But Eleanor's at Ellen's for the afternoon." "I know. So we have time." "I know that too." They looked at each other. Then, without another word, they headed for the house. And for the first time in 3 years, when Rowan made love to his wife, he saw only her. Not Celia's ghost. Not a comparison or a memory. Just Mira. Present. Real. His. Afterward, lying in bed with afternoon light slanting through the window, Mira said, "That was different. Good different or bad different?" "Good. Very good." She turned to look at him. "You were actually here. With me." "I was. I am." He reached for her hand. "No more ghosts." "No more ghosts," she agreed. They lay in comfortable silence for a while. Then Mira said, "We should probably get dressed before Eleanor comes home." "Probably." Neither of them moved. "Rowan?" "Yeah?" "I do love you. I'm sure now." His heart felt too big for his chest. "Yeah?" "Yeah, not the way I thought I would. Not the fairy tale version. But the real version. The one where we're both broken and trying and sometimes failing but doing it together anyway." She squeezed his hand. "That version. That's the best version," Rowan said quietly. "I think so too." They got dressed eventually and went to collect Eleanor. Their daughter took one look at them and grinned. "You both look happy," she announced. "We are," Mira said, and she meant it. That evening, they got a message from Thorpe's agent. The boundary had been wrong, a clerical error that extended the property line 15 feet too far. They'd redraw the documents properly, and there'd be no further dispute. Mira accepted the apology with grace, but made sure the agent knew she'd be watching any future transactions closely. "You really would have gone after him, wouldn't you?" Rowan asked after the agent left. "Absolutely. Nobody threatens our greenhouse." Our greenhouse," Rowan repeated, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." "Good. Because there's going to be a lot more ours around here." Mira gestured around the farm. "This isn't just your land anymore, Rowan. It's ours. Mine and yours and Eleanor's. A family holding, not a widow's memorial." "When did you get so fierce about this place?" "When I stopped trying to fit into it and started making it fit me." She smiled. "You should try it." Us. He thought about that. About the farm he'd inherited and resented and carried like another weight. About how different it felt now that Mira was reshaping it, claiming pieces of it, making it theirs instead of just his. I think I am, he said finally. Trying it, I mean. It's harder than I expected. Good things usually are. Winter came early that year, sharp and cold. But the greenhouse kept the plants alive, and the house stayed warm, and Eleanor turned 5 with a celebration that involved too much cake and a new doll from Ellen. Mira's horse, finally named Bramble after Eleanor's favorite bush to hide behind, was fully trained now and responded to Mira like they'd been partners for years. The farm turned a small profit, enough to buy seed for spring and replace some worn tools. Small victories, ordinary life, but it felt like everything. One night in late January, Rowan woke to find Mira's side of the bed empty. He found her in the greenhouse, wrapped in a shawl, tending to seedlings by lamplight. "Can't sleep?" he asked from the doorway. "Needed to check on these. They're temperamental." She didn't look up from her work. "Go back to bed. I'll be up soon." Instead, Rowan came inside and picked up a spare watering can. "What are you doing?" Mira asked. "Helping. You don't have to." "I know. I want to." He started watering the far row. "Besides, you taught me which ones need more water and which ones don't. Might as well put that knowledge to use." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the greenhouse warm and humid around them. "Rowan?" Mira said eventually. "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For watering plants? For everything. For coming with me when my mother died. For building this place. For trying even when it was hard. For loving me even when I wasn't sure I could love you back." She set down her tools. "For choosing to live instead of just exist." Rowan crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. "Thank you for forcing me to. For not giving up when I gave you every reason to. For being brave enough to demand better." "We're quite the pair, yes," Mira said into his chest. "We really are that." They stood like that for a long moment, surrounded by growing things and warmth and the life they'd built together. Then Mira pulled back and said, "Come on, let's go to bed." "You sure? The seedlings will be fine for one night." She took his hand. "I'd rather be with you." They walked back to the house together, and Rowan realized something. He was happy, not the wild, reckless happiness of his youth. Not the complicated relief of survival, just simple, solid contentment, the kind that came from building something real with someone who saw you clearly and chose you anyway. He'd spent 3 years mourning what he'd lost, but standing in the cold January night with Mira's hand in his and a warm house waiting, Rowan finally understood what Thomas had tried to tell him all along. You could honor the past without living in it. You could remember what was lost without letting it destroy what remained. You could carry grief without letting it define you. And most importantly, you could choose every single day to live instead of just survive. Spring came with all its chaos. Planting season meant long days and sore muscles and dirt under everyone's fingernails. But Eleanor helped in the greenhouse, learning the names of plants from Mira. And Thomas and Ellen came by often, part of a growing community that included Mira as one of their own. One warm afternoon in April, Rowan suggested they ride out to the field. Rowan won. Mira looked at him sharply. "Why?" "Because I want to see if we can. If we can go there together and have it just be a field instead of a monument. And if we can't, then we'll know, and we'll try again later." He offered his hand. "But I think we can." They rode out together, leaving Eleanor with Ellen. The field looked different in spring, green and alive, flowers blooming between the rocks. They dismounted at the place where Celia had fallen. The rock was still there, ordinary, weathered, just a rock. "I used to see her here," Rowan said quietly. "Every time I thought about this place, I saw her lying there, dying. And now I see you, standing beside me, alive." He turned to face her. "I see us, what we've built, what we're still building." Mira took his hand. "Good." They stood there for a while, letting the wind blow through the grass, watching clouds drift across the sky. Then Mira said, "I think we should plant something here." "What?" "Something that grows. Something alive. So when we come back, and we will come back because avoiding it gives it power, we see life instead of death." Rowan thought about that, about taking the place where Celia died and making it into something new, Not forgetting, not erasing, just adding to it. "What should we plant?" he asked. "Wildflowers. The kind that spread and take over and can't be controlled." Mira smiled. Celia would have liked that. She would have. Rowan squeezed her hand. "Let's do it." They rode back and returned the next day with seeds. Eleanor came with them this time, and together they scattered wildflower seeds across the field. "What are we planting for, Ripa?" Eleanor asked. "For beauty," Mira said. "And remembering, and moving forward all at the same time." Eleanor seemed satisfied with that answer. As they worked, Rowan felt something shift inside him, the last piece of weight finally lifting. He would always love Celia, would always carry the memory of her, but she was part of his past now, not his present. His present was Mira, and Eleanor, and the life they were building together. His future was whatever they made it. That night, Mira came to bed and curled against him without hesitation. No walls, no careful distance, just closeness. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too, and I mean it this time. Not I think or maybe. I know." Rowan kissed her temple. "I know you do." "Good." She yawned. "We should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be busy." "Tomorrow's always busy." "True. But we're doing it together now. That makes it easier." She fell asleep in his arms, breathing steady and peaceful. Rowan lay awake a little longer, thinking about the journey they'd taken, about how close they'd come to losing everything, about how hard they'd both had to fight to get here. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been smooth. There were still days when old patterns crept back in, when he caught himself withdrawing or she raised her walls. But they were trying, choosing each other, every single day. And that, more than perfect love or perfect understanding, was what mattered. The wildflowers bloomed that summer, covering the field in a riot of color. Purple and yellow and white, spreading exactly like Mira had predicted, wild and unstoppable and beautiful. They rode out to see them together, all three of them, and Eleanor ran through the flowers laughing while Mira and Rowan stood hand in hand and watched. "It's perfect," Mira said. "Nothing's perfect," Rowan corrected gently, "but it's ours, and that's better." She looked at him and smiled, that real crooked smile he'd learned to love. "Yes," she said, "it really is, Eat." They walked through the field together, following Eleanor's laughter, and for the first time since Celia died, Rowan felt complete. Not because the past was erased, not because the pain was gone, but because he'd learned to carry it without letting it carry him. Because he'd found someone who saw him at his worst and chose to stay. Because he'd built something real and messy and imperfect with a woman who was brave enough to demand better and patient enough to wait while he learned how to give it. As they reached the far edge of the field, Eleanor called out, "Mama! Papa! Come see!" They joined her and she pointed to a cluster of flowers growing in a perfect circle. "It's a fairy ring," she announced solemnly. "That means magic lives here." Mira glanced at Rowan, something soft in her expression. "I think she might be right." "About fairies?" "About magic." She squeezed his hand, the kind that happens when broken things learn to grow together instead of apart. Rowan pulled her close, kissed her properly, and felt the last shadow of guilt finally let go. The past would always be part of him. Celia would always matter. But Mira, strong, fierce, patient Mira, was his future. And their daughter was laughing in a field of wildflowers that grew where tragedy had once lived. That was the magic. Not in forgetting or erasing or pretending the pain never happened, but in choosing to live anyway, to build anyway, to love anyway. Hand in hand, they walked back through the flowers toward home, leaving the past where it belonged. Behind them, acknowledged but no longer in control. And ahead of them, bright and uncertain and full of possibility, lay everything they'd fought so hard to build. A real marriage, a real family, a real life. Imperfect and scarred and absolutely worth every hard-won moment,